April the 6th, 1996, Saturday before Easter, and we're talking with Mimi, Miss Penny Fisher, about her life. Hi, Mama.
Hi, Al. Well, Al, you said start at the beginning. So I will start with my daddy. When he graduated from Vanderbilt Divinity School, he was sent to a Methodist church in Kansas City, Kansas. And he took with him my mother, who was a young bride and had never been far away from home. They loved the church in Kansas City and had a happy life there. Then they moved to Marshville, Missouri. My brother, I think, was born either in Kansas City or Marshville. From there we moved to Neosho, Missouri, and that's where I was born in 1918. As a Methodist minister's daughter, I was moved around a whole lot. We lived in, when I was a baby, I was sick, so Daddy wanted to come back into the Tennessee Conference, and we were sent to a little bitty town called Tracy City because they had already had conference. And
Where is Tracy City?
it's up in the mountains around before you go to Chattanooga. What are those?
Monteagle.
Monteagle, round Monteagle. And I do not remember this because I was a little bitty girl, but I had been told that my grandfather was visiting us, who was John Charles Lucas. And he asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I said, well, I want a dolly and a sidewalk to roll her on. And from there we moved to Winchester, Tennessee. And from Winchester we moved to Nashville, and my daddy did evangelistic work for a year, and we lived in an apartment there. Then we moved to Clarksville, Tennessee, and I entered the first grade there. And I was a real peculiar child because I was left-handed. My first grade teacher kept telling me I had to write with my right hand. But every time she turned her back, I would slip the pencil into my left hand. Finally, one day, she'd had enough and she slapped me in front of the class. Needless to say, I learned to write with my right hand, but I still eat with my left hand. Then from Clarksville, we moved to Nashville, where I entered the second grade. When we lived, Daddy served Tulip Street Church in East Nashville, and from there he went to Belmont Methodist Church in the Green Hills section of Nashville. We stayed there until I was a senior in high school, and then we moved out of the Tennessee Conference and moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And I was a sick chick because I was a senior in high school. I was vice president of my high school sorority, and I was a cheerleader. And my daddy would not let me stay. He made me move to Louisville with Mother and him. Well, as usual, you find good people everywhere you live, and I soon made some friends in Louisville. And I graduated from this school. Also in Louisville at that time, the girls and boys were separated. The boys went to one high school and the girls went to another. And I graduated from high school in '36. And then I went to Ward Belmont, which was a girls' boarding school in Nashville. And I was not very happy about that either at first, because I grew up in Nashville and I had friends there, and I thought I could just go and do as I pleased, but the Dean of Women set me straight on that pretty soon. Anyway, I learned to love Ward Belmont, and I graduated there. It was a 2-year college, and I graduated there in '38. But I had one unhappy experience there. The sororities had sponsors from the teachers in the school, and it so happened that the club that I joined was called Tri-K, and the sponsor was the gym teacher, and she insisted that every one of us play everything that came along. So I did hockey and basketball and every other kind of bowling. I bowled. We just did everything. Then when I was elected vice president of the sorority, that lasted about a month or two, and then they decided they were going to elect senior proctors. And Miss Morrison, our sponsor, said, I want you to give up your vice presidency and run for proctor of senior hall. And I said, oh, Miss Morrison, I don't want to do that, because I knew I'd have to make some of the girls stay in. What's the word I'm trying to use?
Like
campus. They were
campus,
campus.
yeah.
Well, she insisted that I run because the club would have more points that way. So I ran against my will, and sure enough, I was elected proctor of senior hall. The first person I canvassed was my roommate, and she was very unhappy with me for a while. But she really understood the situation and that I couldn't help. Well,
who was your roommate?
Elaine Baker, and she is still living. She married a Dr. Young, and Bill and I went to visit her several years ago. And she called me a few weeks before Christmas.
Now, she's the one that lives in West Virginia.
Uh-huh. Called me a few weeks before Christmas, and we had a nice long conversation. She was very talented. She majored in dancing, song, and piano, and she has played with the Philadelphia Philharmonic Symphony. She's really a very talented musician. Well, when I graduated from Warren Belmont, by that time Daddy had come back into the Tennessee Conference, and he and Mother were living in Murfreesboro. So when I graduated, I went to Murfreesboro that summer and met a lot of new friends and really did like them. Daddy wanted me to transfer and go to Vanderbilt, and I told him no, that I'd had enough of school. I wasn't going to go to school anymore. So we argued back and forth all summer. And then time for school came about, and all my buddies started going off to school, going off to college. Well, State Teachers College was in Murfreesboro, so I said, well, I believe I'll just go out here to school. So I did. I entered State Teachers College as a junior and loved it and graduated from State Teachers College. By that time, Second World War was on. I moved to Nashville and got a job with the Methodist Board of Education and lived with my aunt, my mother's sister, for a while. And then a friend of mine,
And that was Aunt Layuna?
Aunt Layuna, lived with Aunt Layuna and Uncle Granberry. And then this friend of mine, Ruth Hopkinson, who married Waxo Green, who was a reporter for the Nashville Tennessean, was in the service, and he was overseas, and she wanted me to share an apartment with her. So I did. And we had a good time. And there were soldiers all around us. There were soldiers at Fort Campbell. There were soldiers everywhere. So we met a lot of soldiers. In the meantime, a fraternity brother of my brothers, Don Pierce, had proposed marriage, and I told him I wasn't going to marry anyone during the war. And he was with the military intelligence, and so we corresponded, but I corresponded with a lot of people. While I was working at the Board of Education, I met Rosalind Fisher, and we became real good buddies, and I would go to her and tell her all my life problems, and she would advise me, and we became real close friends. One time she said that her brother-in-law, who was stationed in Huntsville, Alabama, was coming for the weekend, and she'd like to have me come for dinner. And she said, and the real reason I want you to come is because I know you're not interested in him, and he's getting ready to go overseas, and he won't be interested in you, but you have a common background. I went to Red and Rosalind's for dinner, and Bill and I later went out dancing and had the best time. He was such a good dancer. And when he got back to Huntsville, he wrote me one letter. The next letter I got from him was from England. He had gone to England. He was in the Corps of Engineers. And he stayed in England for a good while. Of course, they had the blackouts, and it was, he didn't really get to enjoy England because he was working, busy with projects, engineering projects, so he didn't get to do any sightseeing much. From England, he was sent to North Africa. We still corresponded. And one letter I got from him, he said, "Penny, I can't remember much about the way you looked. I can't remember your eyes, and I can't remember what color hair you had. I wish you'd send me a picture." Said, "Doesn't have to be big, but just send me a picture." So I did. Well, finally he stayed in North Africa for a good while, and then I think he was in Sicily and Italy too for a while. He finally was sent back to the States, and he came home on furlough and visited with Mother and Dad Fisher and his family, and then he came to Nashville to visit Red and Rosalind, and we dated a few times. Then he came back intermittently, and we'd have dates every time he'd come back. We were still writing a lot. This time he was stationed in Washington.
Now, how much time had passed since the first day?
Oh, I met him in 41, and he came back to the States, I guess,
43.
43, I think. It was, he was, well, they had not had VE Day when he came back. But anyway, he invited me to come to Washington to visit him. And back in those days, you young ladies, nice young ladies, didn't go off by themselves. So Mother was going with me. Well, I bought my train ticket, and I paid my landlady. But this time I was boarding with Mrs. Brumball, who was a wonderful, dear lady and made the best cornbread I ever put in my mouth. Also made wonderful pineapple upside down cake. I paid her, and I had a date that night, and we went dancing, and I went to the restroom, and then he went to the restroom, and when I got back, everything seemed to be fine. The next morning, I was going to take a bus to go to church, and I looked in my purse, and my wallet was gone. All my money that I was going to take this trip to Washington. So I called Mother and Daddy, who were living in Columbia, Tennessee at that time. And they had a conference. And Daddy said, "Well, we may let you go to Washington, but we don't have enough money to give you the money to go to Washington and let Mother go too. So we're going to trust you to go by yourself."
And how old were you?
I was about either 20 or 21. And scared to death. I didn't want to go on that train to Washington by myself, but Bill met me, and he was a perfect gentleman the whole time. I was there a week, and some friends of his were also stationed in Washington, and we went to Mount Vernon with them, and Bill, we still had gas rations, but he got a hold of some coupons, and he had a car, and he had enough gas to take me around Washington. And he had engaged a room at the Mayflower Hotel, Washington. The morning that I was going to leave, he had to be at his desk, and he could not take me to the train station. So he told me good night the night before. That morning, before I was going to the train, I went up to check out, and the receptionist said, "I'm sorry, Miss Pennington, your bill has been paid." And I said, "What?" I was so embarrassed because I thought they'd think, "Oh, goody, goodness, she's a prostitute.
Oh my.
Oh, it just embarrassed me to death. Anyway, I went back to Nashville, and Bill and I continued to correspond. And finally, I got a letter saying, this isn't going to get it. This long distance courtship just doesn't work. I'm going to ask for a transfer to the Memphis depot. He asked for a transfer, he got it, and then that made it easier for him to come to Humboldt to visit me, and the courtship progressed pretty rapidly from that time on.
You were in Humboldt?
I mean in Nashville. He visited me in Nashville. He proposed sometime the first part of April. When I accepted, he gave me a ring, and we set the date for June the 15th. And that didn't work out with Dave Fisher, so we had to move it to June the 23rd. We were married June the 23rd, 1945. We lived in Memphis. Bill was still stationed at the depot. And then V-Day was over by that time. One afternoon he was playing softball, and he got a message, and he came to me and he said, I have to go to Washington. And I said, why? And he said, I can't tell you. And I kept after him, as women do. I just kept nagging and nagging. Finally he said, I'll tell you, but you can't tell anyone. The war in Japan is about to come to an end, and they've called me to Washington to divert some of the
Ships.
supplies and
Supplies,
things.
yeah.
And we were due to come to Humboldt that weekend to visit Mother and Dad Fisher, who lived here in Humboldt. So I came on to Humboldt by myself, and they wanted to know where Bill was, and I said he was called to Washington, and they wanted to know why, and I said, I don't know. They thought I was really stupid. But anyway, then Bill got out of the service and took a job with Chevrolet. They gave him, he was to be a district manager, and they gave him the state of Mississippi as his office, and we went all over Mississippi trying to find a place to live, but there were still camps all over the place, and Army personnel and Navy personnel were living in renting homes, rooms, whatever they could find. We couldn't find a place to live. So Mother Fisher talked to us, and she said, if I find a place in Humboldt, ask your boss, Bill, if you can live there. So Bill asked his boss. He said, yes, I'll just change your territory to West Tennessee, which
Right.
he did. And we moved into a little apartment in downtown Humboldt, upstairs, and because Bill used it as his business office, and then he traveled all the time, we paid $25 a month rent, if you can believe it.
Now, that's the apartment that was on Central.
Central Avenue.
Yeah.
And that's where Hal Fisher was born. He was born January the 15th, 1947. And we were pretty crowded, and it was not very, we didn't have central heat. We just had a heater thing. And it
Now,
was
where was I? Was I born at St. Mary's?
St. Mary's Hospital.
And Dr.
Dr.
Osler?
Osler was your doctor. He was a fine doctor. And when you were born, Hal, I stayed in the hospital for about 10 days. When they brought me home in an ambulance and took me up the steps. We stayed there for a good while, but Bill decided we needed to build a house. So we built a house, and Pete Sedberry was the contractor for us.
I didn't know that.
Built that house for us out on Jackson Highway, and Robert and Betty Summer live in that house now. So we lived in that house for a year, and Bill was transferred to Memphis. So Hal, you and I stayed in Humboldt until we sold the house, and then we moved to Memphis, and we bought a house on Winoka, and it was a 2-bedroom house, nice house. And I think we did a little redecorating, and I think we moved in about the 1st of November. And on Thanksgiving Day, Bill's sister Virginia had her wedding ceremony in our house there. And then I knew I was pregnant when we moved to Memphis, when you and I moved to Memphis. And the next week I had an appointment with this doctor, and he said, Miss Fisher, I think you're going to have twins. I said, oh, no. And he said, I think you are. Well, his nurse said, his name was Dr. Bringle. He was a wonderful doctor. His nurse said, Dr. Bringle, you have twins, and you hope everybody that you look after has twins. She said, I think you're imagining 2 heartbeats. But anyway, the end result was that Jim and John Fisher were born on Good Friday night on April the 15th, 1949. And so we had to find a larger house. We moved on Southwood into a house that Clemens Wilson, our friend, was building houses at that time. We bought a house there. We stayed there until the twins, I think, were about almost 2 years old. Bill had a chance to buy a dealership in Humboldt, and he did. We pooled all the money we had and a lot of money that Daddy had saved, and we bought a dealership here. Also, Bill's friend Willie Brown, who had a dealership in Alamo, loaned him some money so he could buy the dealership. And we moved, Bill moved to Humboldt, and Hal, Jim, and John and I moved in January, February sometime. And we had to rent a little house. There was nothing that was available for us to buy. And we were crammed into a little bitty house on Northwood.
I remember that.
And we lived there.
Now, what year did y'all move to Humboldt?
1951. And that's when Bill opened his dealership, had a grand opening, and we did real well. But here we were again in a 2-bedroom house, and all 3 boys were in the same room. And by the way, our dear friend Allie, who had worked for us in Memphis, moved with us to Humboldt. She had a room in Lena Macklin's house, and she stayed with us until she died. But anyway, we lived in this little house on Northwood, and then Bill had an opportunity to buy a house on North 28th. So we moved over there, and we were delighted. Well, by that time I was pregnant again. But we were delighted because we had a fenced-in yard, and we said, oh, that's going to be wonderful for the boys. Well, the day we moved in and the moving truck was there, Jim and John climbed over the fence, and I said, oh, me, that's not going to work at all. But we lived there for several years. Mary Ann was born when we lived on North 28th. She was born on March the 1st.
52.
See, Mary Ann, she forgot already.
52.
52.
That's right.
So we had a 3-bedroom house, but again, we were crowded. So Bill said, I think we're going to have to build a house, and I, being the practical one in the family, said, we can't do it, we can't afford to. And Bill, being the gambler and opportunist, and his thinking usually turned out much better than mine. He said, we need to build a house while the children are little. They need it now, not when they go off to college. So we began to build the house further out on Jackson Highway. And our next door neighbors were Ann and Jamie McLemore, and Connie and Sammy. And we lived there for about 18 years, I believe it
When
was.
did you move into that house? Was it 57?
Hell, I don't remember when we moved in.
No, it was before 57.
But we lived there. You graduated from high school. We lived there, and Jim and John were, well, and Mary Ann too. All of you graduated from high school when we lived in that house.
In college? Well, he graduated from
Yeah,
college.
and then you went to Martin, to college, and you were in the ROTC. And you met and fell in love with Barbara, and you all set your marriage date for October the 22nd? 5th?
5th.
25th. In the meantime, Bill had back surgery and you went to Indianapolis to, I forgot the name of camp.
Fort Benjamin Harrison.
Okay. And you finished your course there and you came back and you and Barbara were married on the 25th. And then you went, after a short honeymoon, you went right to Germany. And Barbara followed you in December. And you had your first Christmas by yourselves in Germany, and we felt so sorry for you, and I think you all having a big time. I don't think you missed anyone much.
Now, that's when Papa sold the business, was when we married.
After that, though, it was after you married. He had his surgery and was just barely getting up from surgery when you two married. Let's see, you went in December, and was it the next summer that Ann and
Y'all
Charlie
came-
and
yeah,
Craig and
yeah.
Bill and I came to visit you in Germany and had a wonderful time? And you took a leave, and we went to Austria and Italy and parts of Germany. Then you had to report back for duty, and Barbara and Bill and I took off. We went to Luxembourg and Paris, France, and what was that?
Denmark,
Denmark.
Denmark.
Copenhagen.
Did y'all go to the Netherlands? You didn't go to the
No.
Netherlands.
Yes, we did too.
Okay,
Yes, we surely did. But so we had about a 2-week tour that we had to leave you at home working, right in Germany. Then we came back. Jim and John were at Martin, and John and Sally wanted to marry. So they set their wedding date for July, I believe it was. Yeah, her birthday is the 12th of July. They were married on the 10th or the 11th of
Now,
July.
was that the same summer y'all came to see us?
No, it was the next summer. They married the summer after you all did, I think. I'm pretty sure they did.
Well, but the summer after we married was the summer you came. We married in October and you came in July.
And we came that summer. They were already married because John and Sally stayed with Mother.
Y'all must have come over in August or something.
Came over in July.
Or you must have come
They
right
were,
after.
they were still on their honeymoon
Just
when
right
we
after
left,
their wedding.
and Aunt Leuna stayed with Mother, and then when they came back, John and Sally moved into our house. And so they married, and they were seniors at Martin. And Jim decided that he needed to move to newer territory. He just didn't much want to be at Martin with John and Sally married. So he decided to finish at Knoxville. So he moved to UT Knoxville and lived with several boys, and finally wound up living with Annabelle and Gordon Daniels for several months until he graduated. In the meantime, Mary Ann graduated from high school. She went to MTSU, Middle Tennessee State University, which was actually the same school.
Just like her mama did.
Yeah, she went just like her mama did. And she met Phil Cook there, and they fell in love, and they had a stormy courtship though. But anyway, then they married. In the meantime though, I'm getting ahead of myself. When Mary Ann was a junior in high school, Bill came in one day and said, I've sold the business. Bill could tease me looking straight at me with a blank face, and I would believe anything he told me. So I just assumed, and then I'd find out he was kidding. So I said, yeah, I know you sold the business. He said, I really did. And I kept denying that he did, and I couldn't believe that he sold the business and never once mentioned to me that he was going to. I didn't have anything to do with it. He just said, I sold the business. So that really perturbed me because I didn't know what we were going to live on. But anyway, that worked out all right. And then Mary Ann graduated from high school, and she went to MTSU. Fell in love with Phil. In the meantime, you and Barbara came back from Germany.
And grandmother came to live with you sometime.
And she was living.
Yeah,
She's-
grandmother came to live with us while we were still in the house on the highway. And we moved upstairs, gave her our bedroom downstairs. And Bill took a tumble down the steps, and I think that was the beginning of his back trouble. Anyway, finally the doctor said that we would have to move out of that house, that Bill could not go up and down the steps, and that he could not handle the yard. So we sold the house. It never did get on the market. Some friends knew we were going to sell, and they just bought it before it was ever on the market. And they wanted possession of it in October. So we moved to town and rented the Jim Guthrie house. And then Pepper Martin started on our house. And of course, Bill was free to go and look for lumber and help him. He took a lot off of Pepper, so Pepper could stay right there with his men. And we moved into that house in February. And I think you came home about the time.
March. Came
Yeah,
home
we
March.
hadn't been in the house long at all when you came home. And then you and Barbara moved to Iowa. And Barbara was pregnant. And
Is that little boy right up there?
one morning we got a call. One June morning, the 8th of June. Hal, you called us and you said, Andy's here. So you'd already said you were gonna have a little boy and his name was gonna be Andy. So that was great. As soon as Barbara's mother and daddy, Andy and Charlie, went out, and when they came back, we went out to see our first grandson.
And here he is.
And here
Speak
he
of the
is.
devil.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, me. Well, you all lived in
Everything.
Iowa until the next Christmas. And how you weren't happy with the way the business was being run out there. So when you all came from home for Christmas, you came in a Ryder truck, I think, in the car,
That's right.
and moved to Humboldt.
Moved in with you.
And you moved in with us, and you took a job with
Firestone.
Firestone. Barbara got a job teaching school. And Bill and Andy and I had the best time. We stayed home and played with Andy. And then, let's see, I guess Mary Ann married then next. She and Phil married June 26th. And Barbara and,
No, Jimmy married.
yes, he did. Jim married Susan, I cannot remember.
Gibbs.
Gibbs.
Gibbs. And they lived in Helena, Arkansas. And Mary Ann and Phil married, and Barbara and Susan and Sally and Ann, well, they were all in the wedding as bridesmaids, and Andy was the little ring bearer. In the meantime, John and Sally had lost a little baby. She lived, I think, 36 hours, Kimberly Fisher. Then Katie was born, but Katie was a baby when Mary Ann and Phil married. She was about 3 months old, so I guess. And then let's see. What happened next? Anyway, Barbara, you and Hal bought a house on North 29th Extended
Right.
and moved there. And then Barbara became pregnant with Eddie. And Eddie was born on March the 23rd. I've forgotten the year. 1978. And so we had 2 grandchildren.
She was the
Three.
third.
She
Katie.
was the third with Kate.
That's right, that's right. We had 2 Red Eddie granddaughters, Katie and Eddie. And
And while I was pregnant with her, Jimmy married Madge.
yes. Then Jim and Susan divorced. And then Jim brought Madge home to visit us. And they were married October the 22nd, baby. They married in October.
That's
And then
John,
John and
well, she was,
Will was born
Will was born. Will
in
and,
the spring.
and
Will.
Brian were born real close together.
that's right. Madge and Mary Ann were pregnant at the same time. Brian was born on April the 27th. And 5 days later, on May the 2nd, Will was born. So Bill and I were real busy. We were up with up there helping Mary Ann when Brian was born, and we just said, we called the other grandmother, we were heading to Mississippi. We came and spent the night, and then headed out the next day for Mississippi. So our grandchildren, we were getting lots of grandchildren now. That made us
She had a
real
wreck.
happy.
Mississippi.
Yes, on our way we had a very unfortunate accident and a very unfortunate encounter with Emmanuel, who was on the Mississippi Highway Patrol.
Out of Mound Bayou, Mississippi.
That's right. And we finally had to go to court. And we kept up with Emmanuel, though. He was so ugly to us. And Bill wrote the governor. And the governor apologized for Emmanuel's treatment of us, and it told us the next time we were in Mississippi, he would be delighted if we spent the night at the governor's mansion, which we never did. But Emmanuel finally got fired. They moved him around till he was fired. And then, let me see what happened. You're going to have to help me with this.
Well,
All right,
the next
well.
round of babies is Lindy and Clay.
Hey,
No,
You
we left
forgot
out Becky.
Rebecca.
Oh,
And
Becky and John Charles
Becky and John Charles
were
were born
born the
next.
next year.
all right. Becky was born on September the 30th. And there was a big
1980.
discussion, 1980.
1980.
There was a big discussion over whether she would start to school when time came or whether she would be delayed since she was right on the borderline. But they decided to let her start. So she started kindergarten. And then she was born September the 30th, and was it the next December that John
Yeah,
Charles?
Yeah, just 2.5 months.
John Charles was born December the 19th. In the meantime, Sally was having some pretty bad problems. And Bill and I found ourselves going to Memphis frequently to kind of look after Katie and John Charles. And that was a hard time. In the meantime, John and Sally moved from Humboldt to Dyersburg, where John was director of Chamber of Commerce. And through a banker friend that he met in Dyersburg, John got a job with First Tennessee Bank, and they moved to Memphis. And John Charles was born in Memphis. Then things sort of went along normally for a while.
Lindy and Clayton.
And then Lindy was born on the March the 1st, and she and Phil share the same birthday. And then Clayton was born, was it that same year? Clayton was born on the 1st day of May. And Mary Ann went to a doctor's clinic where there were 3 doctors. One of the doctors was the head doctor was Dr. Benjamin Cowell, who was a Humboldt boy, grew up in Humboldt. 2 of the doctors told Mary Ann she was going to have a little girl, and Dr. Ben said, Mary Ann, no one but God knows what you're going to have. But anyway, Mary Ann went to the hospital, and the nurse at the hospital told me that I was going to have a granddaughter shortly. And everybody said it was going to be a little girl. Then Phil came out bearing this little bundle of joy, and I said, what's her name, Phil? And he said, his name is Clayton. So now we had 9 grandchildren, and they have been the joy of my life and of Bill's life. So I had been teaching school, and Bill, after he sold his business, the doctor said he was just not able to hold any kind of a job, so he had been retired, but he kept himself busy. He did a lot of work out at the country club. He was the greens supervisor, and he really took care of the greens at the country club. I was teaching kindergarten. And then Bill said it was time for me to retire, that he was tired of not being able to go see the children until after school Friday, and we had to come back Sunday so I could teach Monday. So he insisted that I retire, and I did. And Bill and his 2 sisters, Raina and Vera, and I did a lot of traveling, and we had such a good time together. Raina and Vera, whatever Bill wanted to do was perfect. So they were just great traveling companions. A lot of times they would make excuses and say they were tired and they were going to eat dinner in their room. But we knew they were just trying to let us get off to ourselves.
So where some of the places y'all went?
Well, one trip we took, we went from Illinois up through Minnesota and the Dakotas, and went into Canada at the eastern part of Canada, and went all the way through to the western part. And we went 2 or 3 different times to Canada, and we loved Banff and Lake Louise and Jasper National Park. The Rockies there were just perfectly beautiful. One time when we were traveling out west, we went to Colorado, and Raina and Vera and Bill and I spent a night with my cousin John Sawyer in Colorado Springs. And then we went to several places. And by the way, I forgot how when you were a senior in high school, unbeknown to your daddy and I, you had applied for a job at Yellowstone. And we didn't know anything about it until you were accepted. So grandmother was living with us at the time. So Bill and Mother and you and the twins and Mary Ann and I all got in the station wagon. We took you to Yellowstone. You had to be there by the 1st of June.
5th of June.
5th. Anyway, when we drove into Canyon Village, where you were gonna work, the snow was up to the top of the roof of the store. It was cold. When we told you goodbye, you were standing there like this. Oh, and I hated to leave you there worse than anything, and I don't think you were too happy about us leaving. Anyway, you stayed there for a while. One morning, you kept telling us you were homesick. You didn't much like it there. One morning, we got a call from our representative, Fats Everett, and he said, "Are you aware that Hal is leaving Yellowstone?" And we said, "Well, yes, that we thought that you had told us you were going to leave. And you left Yellowstone with a friend, and I think you did some work in the forestry department, didn't you, for..."
We investigated that, and that was too far out in the boonies for us.
Okay. So this boy had a car, and you and this boy were so homesick that you came home by the way of Canada.
What did Fats Everett have to do with it?
Well, the congressman of wherever the workers are from
After Richard?
well, yes, and they have to keep tabs on them, you know, and since Hal quit, it went on his record, and he could not go back to Yellowstone to work anymore because he quit. But anyway, Hal and this young man came in home one Sunday afternoon. They were two of the most pitiful looking boys I've ever seen, and I think they had a quarter between them. They had spent the Saturday night in a cornfield out around St. Louis somewhere.
That's right.
Something about a dog.
I don't remember about the dog, but I
That
did.
dog looking in the
And
window.
I remember the boy had to have some tires or something. Bill gave him some tires so he could get back to Ohio or wherever he lived. And then, let's see. Bill and I joined Betty Woody on a tour to England. And we had a weekend in Ireland, and we had a night in Scotland. I wish we'd had more time in Scotland because I really did think it was beautiful, and Ireland was certainly a beautiful country. And that was a fantastic experience for Bill and me because when we were in England, we lived with one family for a week, and then we lived with another family for about 10 days, two different families. And until this last Christmas, we were still hearing from them. Now, I did not get a Christmas card from them this last Christmas, so I don't know what's happened to them. They were lovely people, and they certainly gave us an insight into the English people and the English countryside that we would have never gotten as just plain tourists. Bill and I loved to travel, and we kept traveling. In the meantime, Jim was a golf pro at Indianola Country Club in Indianola, Mississippi. And he called one summer and said that he had had a call to the ministry. And Bill and I were delighted, and we said we'd help in any way we could. So we went with Jim and Madge. We looked at the divinity school at Duke, and of course that was a great school. And then we went to Kentucky to Asbury College, and that is also a fine, fine Methodist seminary. But the little town that Asbury College is in was about the size of Gibson. And Madge didn't want any part of that. It was too little for her. That was 11 miles out from Lexington, Kentucky. But they decided on Duke. So they went to Duke and lived in an apartment in Durham. And then, they were moved because at the seminary, the students are required to take over a church for experience and to help churches too. So Jim and Madge and Will and Lindy moved to Sanford, North Carolina, where Jim had 2 churches. Both churches were nice and they had a happy time in Sanford. It was good experience for all of them. And I must say that we enjoyed going over there. North Carolina is a beautiful state. Bill and I had a good time going over there to visit them. When he finished, his first church was in Grenada, Mississippi. And that's where they are at the time of this topic right now. They may move this year, but I don't know. But they've been very happy in Grenada, and Jim has 4 churches now. 3 of them are real small. The largest church that he has is in the city of Grenada. And that church was voted the best small church in the Mississippi Conference last year, which was quite a feather in Jim's cap. And then in 1993, Bill and I decided we would go to Branson, Missouri. We talked about it. Oh, in the meantime,
She's reading her cue cards over here.
in the meantime, John and Sally divorced. And Bill and I helped out as much as we could, and John met Vicki Dunn at the bank. She was working at First Tennessee, and he was working there too. And John fell madly in love with Vicki, and he finally persuaded her to marry him. And is this going outside this family?
No.
And that was the best day's work he ever did, was getting her in the family. She's made a wonderful mother for Katie and John Charles, and a good wife for John, and they've been very happy. And she's been a blessing to our family. And now Bill and I are going to Branson. Huh? What else did I forget?
I was gonna say Cadence. That's not it.
So Bill and I set out for Branson, Missouri. We left one Sunday after church, and I was not a happy traveler because it was pouring down rain. Tornado watches were out, and I was miserable. And the rain was so bad that Bill decided when we got to Memphis, he said, "Would you like to stop at John and Vicky's?" And I said, "I sure would." So we went over to their house, and they were out doing some grocery shopping. Katie and John Charles were there. And they both said, "Mimi, you and Papa just stay and spend the night and go to Branson in the morning." And I was all set to stay, but Bill said, "No, we're going on." So we went ahead, and the rain got a little bit better by the time we got into Arkansas. We spent the night in Conway, Arkansas, because it was a tiring trip for Bill, who was driving, and for me, who was helping him drive. We pulled in at Ramada Inn Motel, and they had a great restaurant there, and we had a delicious dinner, and then we went back to the room, and as was our habit, Bill would go to the Coke machine and get us a Coke, and we'd share a Coke before we went to bed. That's just a habit, silly habit we'd gotten into. And the next morning, on November the 15th, I got up and was dressing and told Bill time to get up, and he didn't answer, but that was nothing unusual because he was asleep a lot of times when I got up. But he still didn't answer, and I went over and shook him, and I knew something was wrong. I didn't know just what. I thought he'd had a stroke, so I called the desk at the motel and told him I needed help immediately. It so happened that some paramedics were eating breakfast in the motel, and they came right over and told me that Bill was dead, had been dead about 4 hours. It was a wonderful way for him to go, and I'm sure he was not in any pain because he had a very pleasant expression, almost a smile on his face. So, and I didn't hear a sound out of him, so I think he just passed away in his sleep. That was a very traumatic experience for me, but I found that there are wonderful people all over this world. The manager at Ramada Inn went out of his way to do whatever he could. He brought coffee and donuts to the room and said anything he could do to help. The policeman came, and a young policeman called John for me, and I guess God just works things out for you. John had already left for work, and I had told the policeman to call the house. Vicky was a little late getting off of school that morning, and she was still at home, so she got the message. In the meantime, this young policeman said, "We have a chaplain with our police force. Would you like for him to come and be with you?" And I said, "Yes." The chaplain came, and he was nice as he could be, and he stayed for a while, and in the course of conversation, I told him that we were Methodist, and he said, "There's a retired Methodist minister connected with First Methodist Church here. Would you like for him to come?" Because the chaplain had an appointment somewhere. So when the chaplain left, the minister from the Methodist Church came, and then the chaplain came back again and said, "I just wanted to speak to you one more time before you left." So I had 2 ministers with me the entire time until John and Vicky got back. When we got home, all of the children were there and the grandchildren. Hal and Jim and John just took charge of everything because I was just a zombie. I was in shock. But they got me through that. And Barbara and Madge and Vicky and Mary Ann were right there for me. And Vicky, I can't remember whether she went home and came back, but she stayed with me for about 4 days, I think. And she did a lot of she contacted Social Security and did a whole lot of business for me. And one day I went to town to the grocery store, and when I came back, Vicky said, "I hope I have not overstepped my bounds, and I hope you won't be unhappy with me. But here's what I've done," and she took me into the closet in our bathroom, and she had taken all of Bill's things out of the closet and moved my things in there, which was a great blessing because it took away the pain that I would have had in getting rid of Bill's clothes. All of you children and grandchildren have been so supportive of me. All my life, all since you've been grown and married, had these precious children. God has seen me through some rough, tough times. But I've managed to keep my faith, and I've managed to stay busy, and life goes on, and I thank God for the marriage that Bill and I had, and for the precious children we had, and the precious grandchildren. And I don't know what tomorrow brings, but right now, on this Saturday, April the 6th, before Easter, April the 7th, things are fine. I put a cross that was given to Bill at the funeral. I had it, had the ribbon changed and had it fixed, and it is on his grave now. And as of right now, things are fine.
Oh, is that a cut? Okay, that's a wrap.